The water in the Bering Sea sits at 29 degrees Fahrenheit, cold enough to stop a human heart in under 3 minutes. Kenna Frost didn't care about the math. She only saw the fur, the blood, and the desperation clawing at the broken ice. One by one, she dragged 15 bodies from the freezing black abyss, risking her life for a pack of drowning wolves. But when she dove in for the 16th, a massive 320-pound beast sinking into the dark, she wasn't just saving an animal. She was resurrecting a king. And the moment he opened his eyes, the color of winter twilight, the war that tried to kill him, came knocking on her door. This is the story of how one woman saved a dynasty and became the only thing the Alpha King fears losing. The thermometer on the dashboard of Kenna's battered Ford F-350 read 12 degrees below zero. It was a Tuesday night in late November, the kind of night where the air in Sitka, Alaska, felt like shattered glass in your lungs. Her knuckles were white against the cracked leather steering wheel, calluses rough from years of salvage work catching on the worn surface. The heater rattled, spitting out lukewarm air that smelled of diesel and old coffee. The fuel gauge sat dangerously close to empty. The red warning light had been on for the last 40 miles. On the passenger seat, a mortgage notice stared up at her. Red letters screamed across white paper. Final notice, $47,000 due. The workshop her father had built with his own hands, the place where he'd taught her to dive to survive, to fix anything broken, it would be gone in 30 days if she didn't come up with the money. 6 months. That's how long it had been since the heart attack took him. 6 months of working 3 jobs. Tow truck driver at dawn, salvage diver in the afternoon, night shifts at the cannery gutting fish until her hands cramped and bled. She'd lost 18 pounds. She couldn't afford to lose more. 1 can of soup a day, sometimes less. The cabin she lived in had a broken heater. She slept in a sleeping bag rated for -40 frost forming on the inside of the windows by morning. No friends. No time for them. The last phone call she'd received that wasn't from a bill collector had been 3 weeks ago. A wrong number. Kenna was 24 years old, and she was drowning. Not in water. In debt. In loneliness. In the crushing weight of being utterly alone in a world that didn't care if she lived or died. The salvage call had come from an unknown number 2 hours ago. A man's voice gruff and hurried. Logging truck stuck near Deep Inlet. Triple her usual rate. $1,500 cash if she got there before the storm hit. She'd hesitated. It smelled like a scam. Wrong location, wrong time, wrong everything. But $1,500 was $1,500. It was a mortgage payment. It was 3 weeks of food. It was hope. So she'd driven into the blizzard, watching the snow swirl like angry ghosts in her headlights, her hands trembling on the wheel from cold and hunger and fear that this was all for nothing. Kenna crested the ridge, her high beams cutting through the swirling snow. Below, Deep Inlet stretched out like a sheet of hammered iron. The frozen lake gleamed dully in the weak moonlight, snow devils dancing across its surface. But something was wrong. There were no headlights waiting for her, no stranded truck, no desperate driver waving her down. Instead, there was a jagged, gaping wound in the ice. Roughly 100 yards from the shore, the surface had collapsed into a massive hole. Dark water churned violently and the opening steam rising into the frigid air like breath from a dying giant. Kenna slammed on the brakes, the heavy truck fish-tailed tires screaming against packed snow before coming to a halt at the edge of the embankment. She killed the engine, rolled down the window. Silence descended. Heavy, oppressive. The kind of silence that presses against your eardrums like deep water. Then she heard it. Howling. Not the lonely call of a wolf to the moon, not the territorial warning of a pack defending its hunting grounds. This was frantic, gargled, the screaming of animals drowning. Kenna didn't think. She moved. The door flew open under her boot, jarring her knees as she hit frozen ground. Her hands found the heavy-duty winch remote and a coil of nylon rope from the truck bed, fingers already going numb in the brutal cold. Down the embankment she sprinted, boots skidding on the permafrost. Her breath came in sharp gasps, white clouds that disappeared instantly into the dark. As she reached the edge of the lake, the scene came into terrifying focus. A massive section of the ice road had collapsed. The hole was easily 30 feet across. In the center of the dark, churning water, a pack of wolves was thrashing. They were enormous, far larger than the timber wolves she occasionally saw in the tree line. These beasts were the size of black bears, their fur matted with ice and oil, their eyes wild with panic, and something else. Something that looked disturbingly like human intelligence. 16 of them, she counted. 16 wolves fighting for their lives in water cold enough to kill them in minutes. "Hold on," Kenna screamed, though she knew they couldn't understand her, though she knew it was insane to try, though she knew she should get back in her truck and drive away and let nature take its course. But she'd looked into those eyes, and she couldn't look away. She acted on instinct, on training honed by years of commercial fishing and salvage diving, on something deeper, something her father had taught her. If you can save a life, you save it. No questions, no hesitation. She secured the rope around her waist and tied the other end to a sturdy pine on the shoreline. The knot was second nature, her father's voice in her head. "Double fisherman's. Pull tight, check twice." She couldn't reach them from the solid ice. She had to go into the slush. Kenna Army crawled onto the precarious shelf of ice at the edge of the hole. The surface groaned beneath her weight, a sickening crack echoing through the valley like a gunshot. She ignored it, ignored the voice in her head screaming that she was going to die, that this was suicide. She reached out, grabbed the scruff of the nearest wolf, a gray and white male with panic blazing in his yellow eyes. He was heavy, unnaturally heavy, 250 pounds of muscle and bone and soaking wet fur. It took every ounce of strength in her shoulders to haul him up over the lip of the ice. He scrambled for purchase claws, gouging the surface, and collapsed 5 feet away, shivering so violently his entire body convulsed. One. Kenna went back. The water soaked through her gloves, instantly biting into her skin like acid. She grabbed another wolf, a russet-colored female whining as the current tried to suck her under. Kenna locked her legs against the ice shelf, leveraging her body weight, and heaved. 2. A massive brindle wolf was holding up a smaller one with his snout, keeping the younger animal's head above water. Kenna grabbed the small one first, a juvenile barely 150 pounds dragging him onto the ice. Then the brindle. 3, 4, 5. It became a blur of adrenaline and agony. The cold began to seep through her Carhartt jacket, numbing her fingers, making her movements clumsy. Her muscles screamed, her lungs burned with each gasping breath of frozen air. But she couldn't stop. They were looking at her. Not with animal instinct, with something terrifyingly sentient, with hope, with desperation, with the knowledge that she was their only chance. 6, 7, 8. The rescues blurred together. Grab, pull, heave. Each wolf a battle against the cold that was winning. Her vision narrowed to a tunnel. Her movements became automatic, muscle memory overriding thought. 9, 10. By the time she pulled the 10th wolf onto solid ice, black spots danced at the edges of her sight. Her hands were blue. She couldn't feel her legs. The wolves she had saved huddled together in a pile of wet fur, too exhausted to run, watching her with eerie intensity. 11, 12, 13. The wind picked up. A banshee screamed, tearing through the valley, driving the temperature even lower. The hole was freezing over. The slush was turning to cement. 14, 15. Kenna collapsed on the ice, gasping. Her entire body shook. Her heart hammered against her ribs so hard she thought it might break through. She looked at the group of wolves, counted them through blurred vision. 15. They were all accounted for. But then the gray wolf, the first one she'd saved, let out a sharp, commanding bark. He limped toward the edge of the ice, favoring his back leg, and looked down into the black water. Kenna followed his gaze. Deep down, sinking into the dark, was a shadow. It was immense. black fur that seemed to absorb what little light filtered through the churning surface. And unlike the others, he wasn't thrashing, wasn't fighting. He was still. He had given up. "No," Kenna whispered. Her voice was barely audible over the wind. "No, you're too deep." But the gray wolf looked at her, looked back at the water. It was a plea, a command, a desperate prayer from one species to another. Kenna cursed her own heart, cursed the part of her that couldn't walk away, couldn't let him die alone in the dark. She unclipped the safety line from the tree. It was too short to reach that depth. She tied it instead to the winch cable she'd dragged down from the truck, clipped the carabiner to her belt. "Don't make me regret this," she muttered to the gray wolf. She took a breath, the deepest breath her frozen lungs could manage, and jumped. The shock was absolute. It felt like being hit by a freight train made of ice and razors. The air left her lungs instantly forced out by the crushing cold. Her muscles seized, her chest paralyzed. For a moment she couldn't move, couldn't think, could only feel the cold invading every cell of her body, shutting down systems one by one. "Kick," her brain screamed. "Kick or die." She forced her eyes open in the murk. The salt water stung, but she could see him. 10 feet down, drifting. The black wolf was massive, 320 pounds of muscle and bone sinking like a stone. Kenna kicked, fought the buoyancy of her coat, the weight of her boots, the screaming cold that told her to surface, to breathe, to live. She reached him, tangled her fingers into the thick jet-black fur of his mane. He was impossibly heavy. She hit the button on the winch remote clipped to her chest. Nothing happened. The cold had drained the battery, or jammed the signal, or broken something vital. Panic flared white-hot in her chest, burning through the ice for just a moment. She was out of air. She was tethered to a sinking monster. She was going to die. "Just let go," a voice in her head whispered, rational, calm, seductive. "Let go and live." But she looked at the wolf's face. His eyes were closed, but there was something noble in the structure of his muzzle. A jagged scar ran down his left eyebrow, puckering the fur. It spoke of battles fought, of wars survived, of a life that mattered. He didn't deserve to die in the dark. With a final guttural scream that expelled the last of her oxygen in a stream of bubbles, Kenna grabbed the cable with both hands, wrapped her legs around the wolf's massive torso, and pulled, inch by agonizing inch. Her vision went spotty. Darkness encroached on the edges of her sight like hungry wolves circling prey. Her muscles were failing. Her lungs were on fire. Her heartbeat was slowing. She kicked off something solid at the bottom, the sunken chassis of a truck. Metal cold enough to burn. The momentum carried them upward. Kenna's hand broke the surface first, then her face. She gasped, sucking in freezing air and water, choking and coughing and drowning even as she breathed. She clawed at the ice edge. Her fingers couldn't grip. Too numb, too weak. And then he was there. The gray wolf. The first one she'd saved. He bit into the shoulder of her jacket. Not to hurt, to hold. His jaws were a vice locking onto the thick canvas. He pulled. Kenna kicked with the last of her strength, dragging the massive black wolf with her. Together they hauled the beast onto the ice. Kenna rolled onto her back, staring up at the snow-filled sky. She couldn't feel her legs, couldn't feel her hands, couldn't feel anything except the slow creeping warmth that she knew was actually the cold winning. Hypothermia. The seductive liar, making you feel warm as you froze to death. She was drifting, the edges of the world going soft and gray. The last thing she saw before the darkness took her was the black wolf coughing up water, his massive chest heaving, and then his eyes snapping open. They weren't yellow like the others. They were violet, an impossible electric violet that seemed to glow in the darkness. And they were looking right at her. Warmth. That was the first sensation, a prickly, painful heat returning to her extremities. Then came the smell, wood smoke, rubbing alcohol, and something musky, like wet earth and raw power, and the deep wilderness after rain. Kenna bolted upright, gasping. She was in her own living room. She recognized the peeling beige wallpaper, the mounted deer antlers over the fireplace that her father had hung 20 years ago, the threadbare couch she was lying on. A fire roared in the hearth, crackling loudly, throwing dancing shadows across the walls. She looked down. She was dressed in dry clothes, an oversized flannel shirt she didn't recognize, sweatpants that belonged to her ex-boyfriend Jared, which she kept in the back of the closet for painting. Wait, who changed her clothes? Panic spiked hot and sharp in her chest. She scrambled backward on the sofa, her hand instinctively reaching for the hunting knife she usually kept in her boot. But her boots were gone, placed neatly by the fire, steaming as they dried. Easy, Kenna. The voice was deep. Baritone. It vibrated in the floorboards. It didn't sound like anyone from Sitka. It sounded like old money and violence and something ancient. You're safe. Kenna whipped her head around. Standing in her kitchen holding a mug of her herbal tea was a man. But calling him a man felt like an understatement. He was towering, easily 6 feet 6 inches tall, with broad shoulders that strained the fabric of a gray tactical shirt. His hair was jet black, wet, and slicked back from a face of sharp angles and rough stubble. And there, bisecting his left eyebrow, was a jagged, angry scar. Kenna blinked. The black wolf. The scar. She looked around the room wildly. It was crowded. Everywhere she looked there were men. Some were sitting on the floor wrapped in blankets she recognized from her linen closet. Others were leaning against the walls, shirtless, their bodies rippling with lean muscle and marred by scars. Some old, some fresh, some still healing before her eyes with a speed that made her stomach turn. There were 15 of them, and one of her. Kenna scrambled off the couch, backing into the corner where her father's old Remington 870 shotgun hung on the rack. She grabbed it, racked the slide. The metallic clack-clack silenced the room instantly. 15 pairs of eyes locked onto her. Amber, gold, brown, yellow. "Who are you?" Kenna shouted. Her voice was hoarse, raw. The barrel of the shotgun shook slightly in her hands, but she kept it level. "How did you get in here? Where are the wolves?" The man in the kitchen. The scarred one didn't flinch. He took a slow sip of the tea. His gaze held hers with a terrifying calmness over the rim of the mug. He set the cup down on the counter, raised his hand slowly. "The wolves are in this room, Kenna," he said. "Don't play games with me," Kenna warned. Her finger hovered over the trigger. "I pulled 16 animals out of that lake. I woke up to a frat house breaking and entering. I'm giving you 5 seconds to explain before I start shooting knees." "We aren't animals," a younger man said from the floor. He had blonde hair, messy and still damp, and he was shivering despite the blankets wrapped around his shoulders. "And you saved our lives." The scarred man stepped forward. The air in the room seemed to shift, became heavier, charged with static electricity that made the hair on Kenna's arms stand up. The other men lowered their heads slightly, a subconscious ripple of submission spreading through the group like wind through tall grass. "My name is Thane Ashford," the man said. His voice carried weight. Authority, the kind that came from years of people obeying without question. "I am the Alpha of the Iron River Pack. These are my enforcers." He gestured to the room. "We were being transported in a containment unit disguised as a logging convoy. We were drugged, sedated. The ice gave way." Kenna laughed. It was a harsh, hysterical sound that echoed off the walls. "Werewolves. You want me to believe you're werewolves?" Thane tilted his head slightly, studied her with eyes the color of winter twilight. "You saw me in the water, Kenna. You looked into my eyes. You felt the weight." He stepped closer. She could see the way his muscles moved beneath the tactical shirt. Fluid. Predatory. "Does a normal wolf weigh 320 pounds? Kenna's grip on the shotgun faltered. He was right. The physics hadn't made sense. The size, the weight, the intelligence in their eyes. the way the gray wolf had commanded the others with a single bark. "Prove it," she whispered. Thane looked at the blond man on the floor, the one who had spoken earlier. Declan. The hand. The blond man. Declan nodded. He held up his right-hand palm facing Kenna. He took a breath. His face contorted in concentration. A ripple of something passed beneath his skin. With a sickening crunch of rearranging bone, his fingernails lengthened, turned black. Razor-sharp talons pushed through the nail beds. Fur sprouted instantly along his knuckles, coarse and gray. It lasted only a second before receding, flowing backward like a film in reverse until his hand was human again, pale, trembling slightly from the effort. Kenna lowered the gun. Her knees felt like water. She slumped against the wall, sliding down until she hit the floor. The shotgun clattered beside her. "I'm hallucinating," she muttered, pressing the heels of her hands into her eyes. "Hypothermia. Brain damage. I'm in a coma." "You are very much awake," Thane said. He crossed the room with a predator's grace. Silent. Fluid. No wasted motion. He knelt in front of her. Up close he was devastating. His face was all sharp angles and rough stubble. Those impossible eyes were framed by thick, dark lashes. He smelled like the cold sea and something spicy, cedar and smoke and danger. He reached out. Kenna flinched. He paused. Let her see his hand. Gave her time to pull away. When she didn't, he gently took the shotgun from her loosening grip and set it aside. "You pulled me from the abyss," Kenna Thane said. His voice dropped to a rumble that she felt in her chest. "You dove into the dark when anyone else would have run. By the ancient laws of my people, I owe you a life debt." He looked at the men in the room. "We all do." "I don't want a debt," Kenna stammered. Her heart hammered against her ribs. "I want you to leave. I want to forget this happened." Thane's expression hardened. He looked toward the window where the blizzard was raging against the glass. Snow piled against the panes. The wind howled like something alive and hungry. "I wish we could grant you that," he said grimly, "but the people who put us in that truck didn't want to transport us." He looked back at her. "They wanted to execute us. It was a coup." And for the first time, Kenna saw something in the gaze of the monster kneeling in front of her. Fear. "They know who you are now." Thane continued. "You used a credit card to buy gas at the station before the lake. You used a registered winch. They are tracking us." He paused. His jaw tightened. "And because you saved us, you're huntable now, too." Kenna stared at him. Her mind raced. Credit card. The gas station 20 miles back. The attendant who'd looked at her strangely when she'd insisted on paying cash, but the reader was broken, so she'd had to use the card. "Who," she whispered, "who is hunting us, Garrick Ashford?" Thane spat the name like a curse. "My uncle. The man who wants my throne. And he has a private army of mercenaries heading for this cabin right now." Kenna stood up. The fear evaporated, burned away in a sudden white-hot surge of anger. She was a survivor. She'd survived the death of her parents. Her mother to cancer when she was 12. Her father to a heart attack 6 months ago. She'd survived the bankruptcy that loomed over her like a guillotine. She'd survived the brutal Alaskan winters that killed tourists and old-timers alike. She wasn't going to die because of some family drama involving magical dogs. She walked to the window and peered out through a gap in the curtains. Through the swirling snow she saw headlights. 3 SUVs blacked out, moving slowly up her long winding driveway like sharks circling wounded prey. She turned back to Thane and the 15 naked shivering werewolves in her living room. "Do you know how to use a gun?" "Your Majesty." Thane stood up. A feral grin spread across his face. It was the smile of a wolf about to feast. "I prefer my teeth," he said. "But tonight, I'll make an exception." Kenna reached into the closet and pulled out a box of shells. Double-aught buckshot. She tossed it to him. He caught it one-handed. "Welcome to the pack," she said. The first bullet didn't shatter the window. It punched a neat spider-webbed hole through the front door, embedding itself in the plaster 3 inches from Kenna's head. "Get down!" Thane roared. He didn't dive for cover. Instead, he flipped the heavy oak dining table onto its side with one hand. The sheer strength required to move the solid wood furniture like it was cardboard made Kenna's stomach flip, but she didn't have time to process it. "Kill the lights!" she yelled to Declan, who was closest to the breaker box in the hallway. The cabin plunged into darkness, illuminated only by the dying embers of the fire, and the sweeping headlights of the SUVs outside the room became a maze of shadows and orange light. Their flanking a voice hissed from the darkness. Kenna recognized it, a man with sandy brown hair and gray eyes she'd pulled from the water. Sullivan. The others called him Sully. He was pressed against the wall near the kitchen window, his body tense. "I smell accelerant. They're going to burn us out." "Standard protocol," Thane growled from behind the overturned table. He was crouching, gripping the Remington 870. "No witnesses. Burn it all to ash." Kenna crawled over to him, keeping her head low. The sound of heavy boots crunching on snow echoed from the porch. "My truck is out back," she whispered urgently. "It's a diesel. Takes a second to start in this cold, but it's got a brush guard." "We can ram through. We can't outrun them in a truck with 15 men in the bed," Thane countered. His gaze scanned the room, tracking movement through the walls with senses Kenna couldn't comprehend. "We have to thin the herd first." The front door exploded inward. A flashbang grenade skittered across the floor, spinning like a top. "Cover your eyes," Thane commanded. Kenna squeezed her eyes shut and covered her face with her arms. The bang was deafening. A white-hot flash seared through her eyelids, leaving purple afterimages dancing in her vision. But before the ringing in her ears could subside, the wolves moved. It was a massacre of physics. The mercenaries' men in tactical gear with night vision goggles stormed through the doorway, expecting disoriented targets. Instead, they walked into a meat grinder. Thane surged over the table. He didn't fire the shotgun. He used it like a club. He struck the first intruder with enough force to crack the tactical helmet. The man flew backward out onto the snowy porch arms, pinwheeling, and crashed into the railing hard enough to break it. Declan and Sully flanked the sides of the doorway. They didn't fully shift. There wasn't time, wasn't energy after the drowning, but their bodies warped, jaws unhinged with wet popping sounds, teeth elongated into fangs that gleamed in the firelight, hands twisted, fingers extending, nails turning to claws. They were nightmares caught between man and beast. Kenna scrambled for her hunting rifle, a scoped .308 she used for deer. She propped it on the windowsill of the kitchen, aiming out into the dark. She saw a silhouette near the wood pile, raising a flamethrower. The pilot light flickered blue in the darkness. "Breathe. Squeeze." Her father's voice in her head, calm, patient. She fired. The recoil dug into her shoulder hard enough to bruise. The boom was thunderous even over the sounds of the fight. The man outside dropped the flamethrower. The fuel tank on his back sparked, leaked, but didn't ignite. "Back door." Now Thane shouted over the gunfire. The group moved as a single organism. The injured wolves were supported by the stronger ones, arms over shoulders, limping but moving. Kenna led the way, kicking open the back door that led to the mudroom. "Wait." She stopped. The propane tank. She pointed to the large white cylinder sitting alongside the house, right where the second team of mercenaries was stacking up, 4 men in formation, weapons raised. Thane understood instantly. He looked at her, a flash of respect in those unearthly eyes. "Can you hit the valve?" "I can hit a quarter at 300 yards, she said. "Do it. We'll cover you." Kenna leveled the rifle again. Her breath came steady, focused. The mercenaries were shouting, realizing their prey was flushing out the back, moving to intercept. She centered the crosshairs on the release valve of the propane tank, a target the size of a golf ball. 80 yards away in a blizzard, she fired. A hiss of gas spewed out, invisible in the night, but audible if you knew what to listen for. "Fire in the hole," Kenna screamed. Thane pumped the shotgun, aimed not at the men, but at the metal siding of the house right above the gas leak. He fired. The slug hit the corrugated steel. Sparks flew. The explosion rocked the earth. A fireball ballooned upward, consuming the side of the cabin and the 4 mercenaries standing there. The shock wave knocked Kenna off her feet, sending her sprawling into the snow. Before she could scramble up, a hand grabbed the back of her jacket. It wasn't Thane. It was a mercenary who had survived the blast. His face was bloody, burned, his combat knife raised high. "You—" A wet tearing sound cut him off. The man jerked, looked down. A massive clawed hand had punched through his chest from behind. Fingers wrapped around his ribs from the inside. Thane stood there, his arm buried in the man's torso up to the elbow, his gaze burning with furious, inhuman light. He ripped his hand free. The body crumpled. Thane was covered in blood, his tactical shirt shredded, a savage king drenched in the blood of his enemies. He looked terrifying, born of winter and war and old legends, but he reached out a gore-slicked hand to her, and his touch was surprisingly gentle as he pulled her up. "The truck," he roared. "Go!" They piled into the F-350. Kenna took the driver's seat. Thane rode shotgun. The others leaped into the bed, hunkering down against the cold and the wind. As Kenna cranked the key, she glanced in the rearview mirror. Most of the wolves were watching the burning cabin, but one, a dark-haired enforcer with a scar bisecting his lip, was staring at his hands. His lips moved silently, like a prayer or a plea. Kenna cranked the key again. The engine sputtered, groaned. "Come on," she whispered. "Come on, you stubborn piece of—" The engine roared to life. She threw it into reverse, spinning the truck around, slammed it into drive. "Hold on," she warned. The heavy truck smashed through the wooden fence, careened down the logging trail. Behind them, her cabin, her home, her father's workshop. The only thing he had left her was a raging inferno against the night sky. Flames reached toward the stars. Sparks flew on the wind. The heat was visible even from 100 yards away. Kenna didn't look back. She gripped the wheel. Tears froze on her cheeks before they could fall, and she drove into the black heart of the forest. 2 hours later, the adrenaline crashed. Kenna had ditched the main roads, navigating a labyrinth of service trails that only locals and poachers knew existed. Logging routes that hadn't seen official use in a decade. Fire breaks cut through the wilderness by crews who were all dead or retired now. She drove them deep into the Tongass National Forest, where the trees grew so thick the snow couldn't reach the ground in some places. Where the darkness was absolute and the silence was heavier than iron. The abandoned copper mine appeared in her headlights like the mouth of some ancient beast. A gaping hole in the mountainside framed by rotting timber supports and rusted warning signs that nobody had bothered to maintain. Kenna parked the truck inside the main tunnel. The engine ticked as it cooled, the sound echoing off stone walls that hadn't seen daylight in 40 years. Silence descended. Heavy, thick, suffocating. In the bed of the truck, the wolves were groaning. Their healing factor was legendary according to the old stories, but they were running on empty, starving, freezing, exhausted beyond the limits of even supernatural endurance. Kenna climbed out of the cab. Her legs shook so hard she almost fell. She leaned against the rusty fender, trying to light a cigarette she'd found in the glove box. But her hands wouldn't stop trembling. The lighter flicked uselessly. Once, twice, 3 times. A flame appeared in front of her face. Thane stood there. He had wiped most of the blood from his face, but his shirt was ruined. Shredded ribbons of fabric hung off his muscular frame, revealing a torso covered in scars. Old ones, new ones, some still knitting together before her eyes. He lit her cigarette, then took it from her lips, took a drag himself, and handed it back. "You drive like a maniac," he said softly. "I drive like someone who doesn't want to die." Kenna exhaled smoke. The nicotine calmed her nerves slightly, but not enough to stop the shaking. She looked at him. "My house is gone." "I will buy you 10 houses, Thane said. His voice was devoid of irony, flat, factual. "I will buy you the whole damn town if you want it." Kenna's voice was tight. I want to know why I just became a fugitive for a bunch of strangers." Thane sighed, leaned back against the truck beside her. He looked at his men huddling together for warmth in the tunnel entrance. Steam rose from their skin as their metabolisms worked overtime to fight the cold and heal their wounds. "We aren't just a pack, Kenna. We are the Royal Guard," he gestured to the men. "The Iron River Pack rules the North American territories, from the Yukon to the Mexican border. Every shifter, every pack, every lone wolf. They answer to one throne." He looked at his hands, turned them over, studied the blood still caked under his fingernails. "I am the Alpha King. My word is law." The way he said it wasn't a boast. It was a burden, a weight he carried in his shoulders, in the lines around his eyes. "My Uncle Garrick was the regent before I came of age. He enjoyed the power, the luxury, the ability to make decrees and have them obeyed without question." Thane's jaw tightened. "When I turned 34 last month, I became eligible for the throne. The elders voted, 12-3 in my favor." He looked at Kenna. Garrick smiled, bowed, pledged his loyalty in front of 200 witnesses, and then he poisoned my wine at the coronation dinner. Kenna felt her stomach drop. Wolfsbane mixed with enough tranquilizer to kill 5 elephants. Silver dust for good measure. He loaded us onto that truck to dump us in the deepest part of the ocean where the pressure would crush our bodies and no one would ever find the evidence. He turned to her. The intensity in that violet gaze made her breath hitch. "If you hadn't been on that road tonight, the entire Royal Guard would be dead. The Iron River Pack would have fallen. Garrick would have claimed the throne and every territory would descend into chaos and civil war." His voice dropped to barely a whisper. "You changed the fate of the world tonight, Kenna Frost." "I'm just a tow truck driver," she whispered back. "No." Thane stepped closer, invaded her personal space. But she didn't back away. Couldn't. The heat radiating off his body was intoxicating after hours in the freezing cold. "You are a warrior. I saw you in that cabin. You didn't hesitate. You didn't freeze. You fought." He reached out. His rough thumb traced the line of her jaw. The touch sent a jolt of electricity through her so sharp she gasped. It wasn't static from the dry air. It wasn't her imagination. It was real, physical, a spark that lit up every nerve ending in her body like someone had plugged her into a live wire. Thane's pupils dilated until his eyes were almost entirely black, ringed with violet. He pulled his hand back as if burned. What Kenna asked, touching her own face where his thumb had been. The skin still tingled. What was that static Thane said, but his voice was rougher than before. Strained. He shook his head, looked disturbed, almost pained. "We need to get the men warm. And we need food. Massive amounts of it. There's an emergency cache in the mine," Kenna said. She was confused by his sudden withdrawal, but she pushed it aside. "Survival first, questions later. Canned stew. Blankets. My dad was a doomsday prepper." She paused. "And explosives." Thane raised an eyebrow. "C4, 8 pounds of it." His grin was sharp, predatory. "I'm starting to really like you, Kenna Frost." They worked in silence to set up a camp deeper in the mine where the mineral content in the rock would hide their thermal signatures from infrared scopes. Kenna opened crates her father had sealed 20 years ago. Military-grade blankets still in vacuum packaging. Cans of beef stew with expiration dates from 2 decades past, but still perfectly edible. Boxes of ammunition. First aid supplies. And yes, 8 pounds of C4 explosive with detonators carefully wrapped in oilcloth. As the men huddled around a small fire Declan had built from scavenged wood, Kenna noticed something. The way they looked at her had changed. They didn't just thank her. They bowed their heads slightly when she passed, moved out of her way with a deference that felt almost religious. Declan sat next to her as she opened a can of peaches with her knife. The young wolf was eating ravenously, shoveling cold stew into his mouth with his bare hands. "You don't know, do you?" he asked quietly between bites. "Know what?" "Why the king looked at you like that, when he touched you." Kenna remembered the spark, the way Thane's expression had shifted from gentle to shocked to almost afraid in the span of a heartbeat. "What are you talking about?" Declan grinned. It made him look even younger than his 24 years. Boyish, despite the violence he'd participated in hours earlier. "Wolves don't just like people, Kenna. We recognize souls. When he touched you, he felt the bond. Bond. The mate bond." Kenna froze. The can of peaches slipped from her fingers. Declan caught it before it spilled. "You mean like imprinting Twilight stuff?" Declan laughed. "Not quite, but close. It's rare. Extremely rare for a human and wolf pairing. Maybe once in 1,000 years. He looked across the fire to where Thane sat alone, sharpening a piece of scrap metal into a crude spear point. His face was hard, closed off, lonely. "It means you're his equal," Declan continued. "His destined mate, the one the moon goddess herself chose for him." Kenna felt her heart hammering against her ribs. "That's insane. Is it?" Declan tilted his head. "You dove into water that should have killed you in 3 minutes. You survived 10. You pulled a 300-pound alpha out of the abyss with your bare hands. You fought mercenaries without hesitation." He smiled. "You're not normal, Kenna. You never were. You just didn't know it." Kenna looked at Thane. He was still refusing to look at her, still sitting apart from his men like a king in exile. "If this bond thing is real, why is he ignoring me?" "Because if Garrick finds out you're his mate," Declan said quietly, "you become the biggest target on the board. The fastest way to break an alpha is to hurt his mate." His expression darkened. "Thane is pushing you away to keep you safe, even if it kills him to do it." Kenna stood up. She walked across the fire-lit cave, sat down next to Thane on the cold stone floor. He tensed. Every muscle in his body went rigid. "I'm not leaving," she said softly. "You should," Thane replied. He didn't look up from the metal he was sharpening. "Once we contact the Loyalists, I'm sending you to Switzerland. New identity, new life. You'll be safe." "I don't speak Swiss," Kenna deadpanned. Thane finally looked at her. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "They speak French, German, and Italian in Switzerland. I don't speak those either. I speak Alaskan." She bumped his shoulder with hers. "You owe me a life debt, Ashford. I get to decide how you pay it. And I decide I'm staying until this is over." Thane looked at her for a long moment. The firelight danced in those impossible eyes, revealing a depth of emotion that terrified and thrilled her in equal measure. "You have no idea what you're asking for," he murmured. "Try me." He reached out slowly, gave her time to pull away. When she didn't, he took her hand in his. His grip was iron strong, possessive. The spark was there again, but muted this time, a steady current instead of a shock. "If you stay," he promised. His voice was a low growl that resonated in her chest. "I will burn the world down before I let them touch you." They sat like that for hours, hands clasped, not speaking, just existing in the small bubble of warmth and safety they'd carved out of the frozen wilderness. Eventually, Kenna asked about his parents. Thane told her about a mother who died giving birth to him, a father who raised him alone until a rogue pack killed him when Thane was 19. Kenna told him about her own mother, cancer when she was 12, her father who worked himself to death trying to keep the workshop running, the heart attack that took him 6 months ago while he was underneath a truck doing what he loved. "I've been alone my whole life," Thane admitted, "even on a throne." "Me too," Kenna whispered, "even in a crowded cannery." Their fingers intertwined. Neither let go. Morning came with bone-chilling cold. The temperature had dropped to 20 below zero. Frost coated the inside of the mine entrance, turning the stone into glittering crystal. The wolves were restless, pacing. Their injuries had healed overnight, but they needed to move, needed action, needed purpose. "We need a phone," Thane announced. "A secure line. The mercenaries will have jammed the cell towers in a 50-mile radius, but there's a landline at the ranger station near Silver Bay. That's 20 miles on foot, Sully noted. We run, Thane said. Wolf form. Kenna rides on my back. Kenna blinked. Excuse me? It's faster, Thane said. His tone brokered no argument. And you can't keep up on foot in deep snow. 10 minutes later, Kenna found herself staring at a massive black wolf. Thane in his true form was terrifyingly large, standing nearly 5 feet at the shoulder. His fur was midnight black shot through with silver along his spine. Those violet eyes remained even in this form, glowing, unearthly. Climb on, Declan said. He was already shifted, a gray wolf with that boyish grin somehow still visible in his lupine features. Kenna climbed onto Thane's back, grabbed 2 handfuls of thick fur. The pack moved. They ran through the forest like ghosts. The speed was exhilarating and terrifying, 30 miles per hour through trees and over fallen logs and across frozen streams. The wolves moved in a perfect wedge formation with Thane at the point and Kenna clinging to his back. The wind stung her face, made her eyes water, but she didn't close them, didn't want to miss a second of this impossible thing. They reached the ranger station by noon, a small wooden structure nestled in a clearing, empty. The ranger was probably at the main office 40 miles south. Thane shifted back to human form, found spare ranger clothes in a locker and broke the door lock with his bare hands. He found the landline, put it to his ear, dial tone. He punched in a number from memory. His face was grim. Code black. Alpha actual. Authentication Zulu 9 or 4. A pause. Yes. We are alive. Another pause. His expression darkened. Sitka is compromised. We're heading to the extraction point. Old cannery at Deep Sound. Have the chopper there in 60 minutes. He hung up. We have a ride. My head of security is bringing a helicopter. Relief washed through the group. The men clapped each other on backs, smiled for the first time since the drowning. Let's move, Thane commanded, but Sully was standing at the window, staring out into the forest. Something's wrong. What no birds? Forest is too quiet. Thane's nostrils flared. He scented the air. Move, now. They ran again, but this time there was an urgency, a prey animal instinct that screamed danger, danger, danger. The old cannery was a rusting hulk of corrugated metal and rotting wood on the edge of the sound. It smelled of fish guts and salt and decades of abandonment. They arrived on the pier with 10 minutes to spare. The gray sky hung heavy with the promise of more snow. Waves crashed against the pilings with enough force to make the structure groan. I hear it, Declan said. His enhanced hearing picked up the sound before the rest. The thwack, thwack, thwack of rotor blades echoed off the mountains. A black helicopter appeared over the ridge, banking toward them. Finally, Kenna sighed. She leaned against a crate. The helicopter descended, kicking up a storm of snow and spray from the sound. But it didn't land. It hovered 10 feet off the deck. The side door slid open, and instead of a rescue ladder, a heavy machine gun barrel swiveled out. Cover! Thane screamed. He tackled Kenna behind a stack of steel pallets just as the gun opened fire. The pier erupted. Bullets chewed through the rotting wood like termites through balsa, sent splinters flying like shrapnel. The sound was deafening. The wolves scattered, diving into the water or behind debris. Thorn betrayed us. Thane roared. His voice was filled with fury and something worse. Heartbreak. No! The voice came from directly behind them. Kenna spun around. Standing 10 feet away with a pistol raised and a satellite phone in his other hand was the dark-haired enforcer, the one with the scar bisecting his lip, the one who'd been praying in the truck bed. Matthias. Thorn is loyal, Matthias said. His voice trembled. He never got the call. Thane froze. Matthias, what are you doing? Garrick made me an offer, Matthias whispered. His gun hand shook violently. He has my sister, Ilara. He said if I gave him your location, he'd let her live. Put the gun down, Thane said. He stepped in front of Kenna. We can fix this. We can save her. It's too late. Matthias didn't shoot Thane. He shot the fuel drum sitting next to the pallets. The explosion blew Kenna and Thane apart. Kenna was thrown toward the edge of the pier, her ears ringing, vision swimming. She looked up dizzily. The helicopter was landing now. The gun had stopped firing. Men were rappelling down on ropes, dozens of them in black tactical gear. Thane was on his knees 20 feet away, shaking his head, trying to rise. Matthias walked up behind him and kicked him hard in the ribs. The Alpha sprawled. Then a man in a pristine white wool coat stepped out of the helicopter. He was older, silver hair, and those same impossible violet eyes. Garrick Ashford smiled. "Nephew," he said smoothly, "you look terrible. Wet dog smell is so hard to remove, isn't it?" Two mercenaries grabbed Thane, forced him to his knees. A third jammed a syringe into his neck. Thane slumped. The wolfsbane took effect instantly. His eyes rolled back. And this. Garrick turned his gaze to Kenna. He walked over, looked down at her like she was an insect on his shoe. "This is the little mermaid who fished you out. How quaint." "Leave her alone," Thane slurred. "Fighting the drug. She's nothing. She's seen too much." Garrick sighed. "Kill her. Dump the body in the Sound. Make sure she sinks this time." Matthias raised his gun at Kenna. His eyes were apologetic, haunted. "I'm sorry." Kenna looked at the pistol, then at the water churning below the pier 30 feet down, then at Thane. He was watching her, helplessness and rage warring in his face. "Run," he mouthed. Kenna didn't wait for the bullet. She pivoted and sprinted, not away from them, toward the edge. "She's jumping," Matthias yelled. He fired. The bullet grazed her left arm, a wasp sting of pain, but her momentum carried her. Kenna launched herself off the pier, diving into the freezing air. As she fell toward the gray, deadly water, she heard Thane's roar, a sound of pure, heartbreaking loss that echoed across the Sound like thunder. Then the water hit her, and everything went black. The cold was different this time. It wasn't the sharp, biting sting of the surface. It wasn't the shock that paralyzed muscles and stole breath. It was a heavy, suffocating blanket, a darkness that pressed in from all sides. The salt water stung the bullet graze on her arm, but the pain was distant, muted. Kenna drifted in the gray void. "Kick," her brain screamed. "Kick or die." She forced her legs to move. Once, twice. Her lungs burned. She needed air, needed light, needed to break the surface. She kicked harder. Her head broke through the waves under the pier. She surfaced in the darkness among the rotting wooden pilings, gasping for air in the narrow space where the structure met the water. Above her, boots hammered against the deck. She heard shouting, the roar of the helicopter engines spinning up, and then slowly, mercifully, the fading sound of rotors as they lifted off. They had taken him. Kenna clung to a barnacle-encrusted beam. Her body shook so violently her teeth clicked together like stones. She waited, counted to 500. Until the silence of the inlet returned, broken only by the lapping waves and the cry of gulls. She dragged herself onto the rocky shore a quarter-mile down from the cannery, collapsed onto the frozen pebbles, coughed up seawater until her ribs ached. Kenna. A shape moved from the tree line. It was Declan. Behind him, Sully and 10 others emerged from the shadows. They looked battered, defeated. Of the 16 she had saved, 12 remained. 1 was a traitor. 1 was captured. 3 had died fighting. Declan dropped to his knees beside her. His hands were warm as he checked her pulse. "We thought you were gone. We saw the blood." "He missed the artery," Kenna gritted out. She winced as she sat up. The bullet had carved a shallow furrow across her bicep, bleeding but not deadly. "Where did they take him?" "The estate," Sully said. His voice was hollow. "Wolf's Head Manor. It's Garrick's stronghold now, 40 miles inland through the mountains. It's a fortress." "Then we go to the fortress," Kenna said. She tried to stand. Her legs buckled. Declan caught her. "Kenna," he said gently, "we can't." Garrick has a battalion of mercenaries. He has the elders on his side. He has the element of surprise. We're 12 exhausted enforcers with no weapons and no alpha. He looked at her with eyes that had seen too much death in too few hours. If we go there, we die. Kenna pulled away from him, stood on her own 2 feet. She was shivering, wet, bleeding, but her eyes were hard as flint. "You said I'm his mate," she said. Her voice was raspy but steady. "You said that means I'm his equal. Does that carry any weight with you?" The wolves exchanged glances. Slowly they nodded. "It carries all the weight," Sully answered. "Good." Kenna pointed north toward the mountains where the Tongass Range rose like jagged teeth against the gray sky. "Because I'm not a wolf. I don't fight with claws. I fight with leverage." She looked at the 12 men, monsters capable of tearing tanks apart, yet currently paralyzed by the loss of their leader. "My father worked the pipelines up in those mountains. He told me stories about the old ventilation shafts that run under Wolf's Head Manor, built during the Cold War as emergency bunkers." "Those tunnels are sealed," Declan argued. "Not to a salvage diver with a shape charge," Kenna countered. "I have C4 in my truck's toolbox back at the mine." She looked at them. "Garrick thinks I'm dead. He thinks you're scattered and broken. He's going to be arrogant." "The Blood Moon ceremony is tonight," Sully realized. His face went pale. "Garrick will execute Thane at 8 o'clock to claim the Alpha power transfer. Tradition demands it happen under the full moon." Kenna checked her watch. It was 2 in the afternoon. "Then we have 6 hours." She started walking toward the tree line. "We aren't going to knock on the front door. We're going to blow the floor out from under them." The drive back to the mine was silent. When they recovered the truck, Kenna didn't just grab the explosives. She raided her father's apocalypse box buried in the back of the cave. She pulled out a Kevlar vest. Heavy, military grade. It smelled like mothballs and gun oil. A collection of flashbang grenades, 6 of them wrapped in oiled cloth, and a semi-automatic tactical shotgun. Benelli M4. Her father had bought it at an estate sale from a veteran who'd used it in Fallujah. Kenna changed into dry clothes in the back of the truck. Black cargo pants, thermal shirt, heavy combat boots with steel toes. She strapped the hunting knife to her thigh. She loaded the shotgun, racked the slide. The sound echoed in the mine like a death knell. When she turned around, the wolves were watching her. Their posture had changed. They weren't looking at a human woman anymore. They were looking at something else. A Luna. A queen. A force of nature wrapped in Kevlar and rage. "Listen to me," Kenna addressed them. Her voice echoed in the cave. "Tonight you aren't fighting for a king." She paused. "You're fighting for my husband." The word slipped out. She didn't know why she said it. It just felt right. True in a way that bypassed logic and went straight to something primal. "And I want Garrick Ashford alive," she added. Her eyes were dark, cold. "I want him to see me coming." The 12 surviving enforcers looked at each other. Then one by one they knelt. Declan went first, clutching his injured arm but grinning wildly. Then Sully. Then the rest. "Yes, my queen," Declan said. They drove to the base of the Tongass Mountains, hiked 2 miles through snow that came up to Kenna's thighs. The wolves broke trail for her, their massive bodies carving a path. The sealed ventilation shaft was exactly where her father's old maps said it would be. A concrete plug set into the mountainside covered in decades of moss and ice. Kenna placed the C4, a small-shaped charge, just enough to crack the seal without bringing down the tunnel. "Everyone back," she ordered. She triggered the detonator remotely. The explosion was a muffled thump. Snow shook loose from the trees, and when the smoke cleared, the concrete plug had a jagged hole punched through its center. The shaft opened into darkness, a 4-foot diameter tunnel descending at a steep angle into the mountain. A rusted ladder bolted to the wall disappeared into the black. "This goes under the manor?" Sully asked. "Straight to the foundation," Kenna confirmed. "Cold War paranoia. They built these all over Alaska." She clicked on a flashlight, started climbing down. The wolves followed. The grand hall of Wolf's Head Manor was a cathedral of cruelty. Built from dark volcanic stone and draped in tapestries of blood-red velvet, the room was designed to dwarf anyone who stood within it. The vaulted ceiling swallowed the light, leaving the space in perpetual flickering gloom. A massive fire pit roared in the center of the room. Around it, 200 of the region's elite had gathered, pack alphas from the territories, corrupt politicians who took bribes in gold, ancient families who preferred to watch history unfold from the shadows. They stood in a silent, suffocating circle, their eyes fixed on the center of the room. Thane Ashford was on his knees. He was chained between two towering marble pillars, his arms wrenched wide. The chains weren't steel. They were silver alloy that hissed and smoked where it touched his skin, burning through flesh and bone with relentless chemical heat. His chest was a ruin of lacerations and deep purple bruising. Hours of preparation for the ceremony. Every breath was a ragged battle against broken ribs. Blood dripped from his chin onto the polished obsidian floor. Garrick Ashford stood before him, pristine in a designer tuxedo that contrasted sharply with the brutality of the scene. In his hand he held a ceremonial dagger, carved from volcanic glass, the blade used to sever the connection between an alpha and his pack power. "Behold the false king," Garrick's voice boomed. He paced before the crowd, soaking in their fear and admiration. He was weak. He allowed himself to be captured, dragged from the water by a human female like a drowning rat. A ripple of uneasy murmurs went through the crowd. Thane didn't move, didn't defend himself. He was conserving every ounce of energy for a moment he prayed would come. Garrick stepped closer, grabbed a handful of Thane's hair and forced his head back. Thane's left eye was swollen shut, a grotesque shade of violet and black, but his right eye snapped open. It burned with defiant, unholy light. "She was stronger than you will ever be," Thane wheezed. Blood sprayed from his lips, staining Garrick's white shirt cuff. Garrick wiped the blood away with disgust. "She is fish food, nephew. I watched her fall. I watched the ocean swallow her whole." He raised the obsidian dagger high above his head. The firelight danced on the jagged black edge. "And now you will join her in the abyss." The crowd leaned in, a collective inhalation of breath. Matthias stood near the throne, his face ashen. He stared at the floor, unable to watch, the weight of his betrayal crushing him. "Any last words?" Garrick sneered. He positioned the blade over Thane's heart. Thane's gaze didn't lock on the knife. He looked past Garrick, toward the floor beneath the dais. His wolf hearing picked up a sound human ears would miss. Tick, tick, tick. A bloody feral grin split his face. "Yeah," Thane whispered. "Duck." Boom. The world turned white. The explosion was precise, devastating, deafening. The shaped charges Kenna had planted didn't just crack the foundation, they pulverized the structural integrity of the dais. A 10-foot section of marble floor disintegrated, collapsed into the hollow ventilation tunnels below. The shockwave knocked the elites off their feet. Dust and pulverized stone billowed upward in a choking cloud, turning the grand hall into a gray nightmare. Screams replaced the silence. The elites scrambled, trampled over each other in blind panic to reach the heavy oak doors. From the gaping hole in the floor, canisters flew out, hissing violently. Smoke grenades. Within seconds, thick white fog mixed with the dust. Visibility reduced to 0. "Secure the perimeter," Garrick shrieked. He was coughing, waving the dagger wildly at shapes in the mist. Enforcers attack, but the shadows in the smoke had teeth. 12 massive shapes leaped from the haze. The surviving members of the Iron River Pack shifted into their war forms. They hit Garrick's mercenaries with the force of freight trains. The sounds of tearing fabric, snapping bone, and guttural snarling filled the air. It was absolute chaos. Thane roared, a sound of pure agony and rage as he strained against the silver chains. He ignored the burning flesh, pulled until the marble of the pillars began to crack. Then through the swirling white smoke a figure walked. She didn't run, didn't scramble. She strode with terrifying rhythmic purpose. Kenna emerged from the haze like a phantom of vengeance. She was unrecognizable. The Kevlar vest made her look bigger, more dangerous. Her face was smeared with soot and war paint. Her auburn hair slicked back. In her hands, the semi-automatic tactical shotgun looked like an extension of her own body. A mercenary, disoriented and panicked, saw her and charged, raising his rifle. Kenna didn't blink. She leveled the shotgun and fired. The boom was thunderous in the enclosed space. The impact lifted the man off his feet and threw him back into the smoke. Another guard lunged from her periphery. Kenna pivoted on her heel, swung the heavy barrel of the weapon like a club. It connected with the guard's temple with a sickening crunch. As he doubled over, she swept his legs out from under him, silenced him with a brutal stomp of her combat boot. She never stopped walking. The room fell into stunned silence as the elites who hadn't fled realized what was happening. A human woman was carving a path through the Alpha's personal guard. Garrick froze. He stared at her through the clearing smoke, his eyes widening in disbelief. The dagger hung loosely in his hand. "Impossible," he whispered. "You're dead." Kenna stopped 10 feet from him. She racked the slide of the shotgun. The metallic clack-clack echoed like a gavel striking a judge's block. An empty shell casing hit the floor with a chime. "You should have checked for a pulse," Kenna said. Her voice was ice-cold, devoid of fear, devoid of mercy. Garrick's face twisted into a snarl of desperation. He pointed a shaking finger at Matthias, who stood frozen near the rubble. "Kill her!" he screamed. "Kill her now, or I swear I will flay your sister alive." Matthias raised his pistol. His hands shook uncontrollably. He aimed the barrel at Kenna's chest. "No!" Thane roared from the pillars, thrashing against the silver so hard that blood ran freely down his arms. Kenna didn't raise her weapon. She just looked at Matthias. Not with hate, with pity. Matthias looked at Kenna, the woman who had saved his life in the water. Then he looked at Thane, his true king. Finally, he looked at Garrick, the monster who ruled by fear. "No," Matthias said softly. He turned the gun on Garrick. But Garrick was an elder wolf. His reflexes were supernatural. Before Matthias could squeeze the trigger, Garrick moved in a blur, snatched the gun from his hand, reversed it, and fired 3 times into the young wolf's chest. The shots rang out, sharp, final. Matthias fell backward, his eyes fixed on the ceiling, dead before he hit the stone. The tragedy froze the room for a heartbeat. But it was the distraction Kenna needed. She raised the shotgun and fired. The slug caught Garrick in the shoulder, blew him backward. He screamed, dropping the obsidian dagger as his tuxedo exploded in a spray of red. He hit the ground but scrambled up instantly, his body contorting, bones snapping and reshaping. He was shifting. Fur erupted from his skin, a snout elongated. Within seconds, a massive white wolf stood where the man had been, snarling, ready to tear Kenna's throat out. He lunged, but a shadow eclipsed him. Thane had done the impossible. Fueled by the sight of Matthias's death and the threat to his mate, he had summoned a strength that bypassed physics. With a final earth-shattering exertion, he ripped the silver chain straight out of the masonry. Shifting would waste precious seconds. He fought as a man, brutal and primal. Thane tackled the white wolf mid-air, colliding with the beast in a thunderous crash. They hit the floor in a tangle of limbs and fur. Thane wrapped the length of silver chain still attached to his wrist around the white wolf's throat. Garrick thrashed wildly. His claws raked down Thane's bare back, opening deep, weeping wounds. Pain meant nothing. Only ending this mattered. Thane pulled the chain tight. His biceps bulged. Veins stood out like cords of steel. "This is for my pack," Thane snarled into the wolf's ear. He pulled tighter. "And this is for my wife." With a sickening wet crack, the white wolf's struggle ceased. The massive beast went limp, its tongue lolling out, eyes staring unseeing at the vaulted ceiling. A heavy ringing silence fell over the grand hall. The only sound was Thane's ragged breathing and the crackle of the fire. Thane stood up slowly. He was a terrifying sight, covered in blood dust and ash. the broken chains still dangling from his wrists like shackles. He nudged the carcass of his uncle with his foot, then looked up at the crowd of terrified elites huddled by the doors. "The usurper is dead." Thane's voice was a low rumble that vibrated the stained glass windows. "Does anyone else wish to challenge my claim?" No one moved, not a muscle. Then slowly the alpha of the neighboring territory dropped to one knee, then another. Then the politicians. Like a wave crashing to shore, the entire room bowed. Thane didn't look at them. They didn't matter. He turned slowly to Kenna. She lowered the shotgun, engaged the safety with a trembling thumb. The adrenaline was crashing now, leaving her dizzy. The pain in her grazed arm throbbed in time with her heartbeat. She swayed slightly, her knees threatening to give out. Thane was there in an instant. He moved with a gentleness that belied the violence he had just committed. He caught her before she fell, pulling her flush against his battered chest. He didn't care about the soot on her face or the blood on his skin. He buried his face in the crook of her neck, inhaling her scent desperately as if it were the only oxygen in the room. "You came back," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion, breaking on the last word. "You actually came back for me." Kenna leaned her head against his shoulder, closed her eyes, let the heat of his body seep into her freezing bones. "I told you, Ashford," she murmured, clutching his torn shirt. "I decide how you pay the debt. You don't get to die until I say so." Thane pulled back slightly to look at her. He cupped her face with his large, scarred hands. His thumbs wiped away a smudge of dirt from her cheek. Those violet eyes searched hers, filled with a reverence that stole the breath from her lungs. He turned to the room, keeping one arm possessively around her waist. "I, Thane Ashford Alpha, King of the Iron River, acknowledge you." His voice rang out with the finality of a gavel. "Kenna of the Ice, you are my mate, you are my queen, and this pack, this dynasty is yours." The 12 surviving enforcers now shifted back to human form, limped from the shadows. They were bloody, naked, exhausted, but their eyes were bright. They walked over, forming a protective circle around Kenna and Thane. Declan, clutching a broken arm but grinning wildly, knelt first. Then Sully, then the rest. Kenna looked around the room. 3 days ago she was a tow truck driver, worrying about the price of diesel and a mortgage she couldn't pay. Now she was standing in a fortress, surrounded by werewolves, declared the queen of the most powerful empire on earth. She looked up at Thane. He was watching her with total, unwavering adoration. A small, tired smile touched her lips. "Does being queen come with health insurance?" she asked softly. "Because I think I need stitches." Thane laughed. It was a rich, joyous sound that chased away the shadows of the hall, a sound of pure relief. He kissed her forehead, then her lips, sealing the promise between them. "It comes with everything, my love," he whispered against her mouth. "Everything." 3 weeks later, under the light of a winter moon, Kenna Frost stood in the same grand hall. But this time, it had been transformed. The bloodstains scrubbed away. The tapestries replaced with banners of silver and black. The fire pit surrounded by white roses that shouldn't bloom in winter but did anyway. She wore a gown of midnight blue. A crown of silver rested on her auburn hair. Thane stood beside her in formal regalia, his hand clasped firmly in hers. The elders performed the coronation, ancient words in a language older than English, older than Latin. When they placed the second crown on Thane's head and declared them king and Luna queen of the Iron River pack, the assembled wolves howled. It was a sound that echoed across the mountains. That made the snow shake loose from the trees. That announced to the world that the dynasty had not just survived, it had been reborn. Later on the balcony overlooking the snowy kingdom, Kenna and Thane stood together, his arm around her waist, her head on his shoulder. The workshop her father had built with his own hands had burned to ash that terrible night. But Thane had commissioned a new one, larger and better equipped, built into the mountain beneath Wolf's Head Manor. Your forge, he'd called it when he showed her. A queen needs a place to build things. The mortgage notice, with its red letters and final demands, was framed on the wall of her new workshop. A reminder of how far she'd come, of what she'd survived. The transition from Frozen Lake to throne wasn't just miles, Kenna said softly. It was destiny. Thane kissed the top of her head. You proved you don't need claws to be an alpha. You just need the heart to dive into the dark when everyone else runs away. Kenna smiled. I saved the king, but in the end we saved each other. Thane pulled her closer. I got my crown back, but I gained something far more dangerous. What's that, a queen who knows how to shoot? Their laughter carried on the wind. Below them in the courtyard, a young woman with dark hair stood beside a memorial stone. Matthias's sister, Elara. Free. Alive. Garrick had released her hours after Matthias gave up their location, a twisted mercy keeping his word to a dead man. She placed white flowers at the base, for the brother who had died so she could live. And high above, Kenna and Thane watched over their kingdom. Two souls who had both been drowning, who had both been alone, who had found each other in the freezing dark, and who would never be cold again.